3, 2, 1.
Good morning and welcome to the Project 2049 Institute's Strategic Competition webinar series. My name is John Gastrite and I'm honored to be the president of this organization. In March 2021, in his valedictory testimony before the Senate Armed Services Committee, then outgoing Indo-Pacific Commander Admiral Philip Davidson stunned senators with his observation that China might invade Taiwan in, quote, the next 6 years, end quote. 2 years later, numerous senior officials have echoed that warning, and on multiple occasions, President Biden has stated that the United States military would come to Taiwan's defense. The why and how to deter the People's Republic of China from such an eventuality is one of the most pressing and important topics in Washington's ongoing policy discussions. Today, we are truly honored to have as our special guest to deep dive into this very topic, a senior policymaker who was present for Admiral Davidson's testimony that day, Senator Dan Sullivan. Sworn in as Alaska's 8th United States Senator on January 6, 2015, Senator Sullivan is one of the nation's preeminent national security leaders, not only from his seat on the Senate Armed Services Committee, but also as a colonel in the United States Marine Corps Reserve, where since 1993, he's served in a variety of command and staff billets on active duty and in the reserves, including as a staff officer to the commander of U.S. Central Command, with a task force in Afghanistan, and in his current reserve assignment as the Chief of Staff for Marine Forces Pacific. Senator Sullivan also served in the administration of President George W. Bush as an Assistant Secretary of State for Economic, Energy, and Business under Secretary of State Condoleezza Rice, where I had the pleasure of working with him. We are extremely thrilled with this opportunity and are looking forward to this important discussion of how the 118th Congress will shape U.S. Indo-Pacific policy. We are also pleased to welcome back Ms. Yuki Tatsumi from the Stimson Institute, along with several of our own Project 2049 experts to participate in a moderated discussion and provide reactions after the discussion between Chairman Shriver and Senator Sullivan. So I'm excited to get things started. But before that, I've got a couple of administrative announcements to make sure you all in the webosphere have the best opportunity to participate. And here they are. There are 2 ways to participate in today's live Q&A session. Number 1, you may send questions directly to us at ask@project2049.net. That's ask@project2049.net. If you RSVP'd for the event, we sent an event reminder from that email just moments ago. You can respond directly to that email with your questions if you would like. If you have a YouTube channel and a YouTube account and are watching this stream on Project 2049's YouTube channel, you may submit questions in the YouTube chat box and our team will collect them and send them to our moderator, Jennifer Hong. Please include your name and affiliation when submitting questions. Questions with names and affiliations are prioritized. With that, it is my pleasure to introduce the chairman of the Project 2049 Institute to kick things off, the Honorable Randy Shriver. Randy?
Thank you, John, and good morning to those viewing this webinar. We are really delighted to have this conversation with Senator Sullivan. He will be joining us shortly. Right now, he is participating in a very important hearing with Secretary Austin and Chairman Milley on the defense budget request for the coming year. And so we're delighted he can break away from that and share some of his very valuable time with us. This is, of course, a very important time to have this conversation. If you think about just the events of this week, we have President Tsai transiting the United States. She'll be spending time in New York and be received by senior administration officials. On the back end of her transit, she'll be spending time in California, and the expectation is she'll have an opportunity to meet with our Speaker of the House, Kevin McCarthy. So a great opportunity for high-level consultations that only these transits can provide face-to-face venue for at this point. We also have former President Ma Ying-jeou visiting China this week. So these 2 visits, one transit, one visit, I think do show in very real, concrete ways the complexity of these relationships and how Taiwan, from a domestic political standpoint, is trying to navigate these complexities. So we will watch these events, of course, with great interest, and expectation is that we will then launch into the presidential contest in 2024 in Taiwan, which is always spirited and certainly will add to some of the challenges and difficulties in terms of managing the cross-strait relationship. We have seen an environment of intimidation and coercion for months now. Some people point to the overreaction to the Speaker Pelosi visit as one of the inflection points. But I think the point for us to understand is the level of activities designed to coerce and intimidate Taiwan have been consistent and have been sustained since that time. Just last week, we tracked 84 aircraft flights from the PLA that went across the center line into the air defense identification zone of Taiwan. We tracked 23 surface vessels that went across the center line and into the areas around Taiwan. So a environment of heavy activity and coercion on a day-to-day basis. In fact, when Project 2049 visited Taiwan in January, and we had the great honor and opportunity to talk to President Tsai, she referred to this as cognitive warfare, that China is doing things every day to try to impact the morale, the spirit, and the outlook of the people of Taiwan. So these are challenges that are ever present now and part of the fabric of the region as we do our work to try to support partners and allies, and as Senator Sullivan does his work on the Armed Services Committee. Just a few brief comments on how the U.S. is addressing this. The Biden administration is taking a comprehensive approach to try to support Taiwan and buttress deterrence. That includes in the economic area. We have three major dialogues in the economic space, including the 21st Century Trade Initiative, and we're expecting some announcements coming out of that. Although short of an FTA, and Taiwan is still not included in the Indo-Pacific Economic Framework, IPEF, we are told that this will be a very robust effort between the U.S. and Taiwan in a bilateral agreement, which in fact could inform the work of IPEF going forward. The hope is that it will be successful enough that it would actually be a model for the work of other countries in IPEF. So there's a trade component, there's a direct security assistance component, and we've watched as the administration has developed a more directive approach, and one that focuses primarily on the counter-invasion scenario. So a prioritization of security assistance that looks at perhaps not the most likely scenario, but the most dangerous scenario of an all-out invasion. The administration, as I said, is being more directive in evaluating security assistance needs and giving responses to Taiwan, but it does seem that they're leaving a gap in terms of meeting the coercion scenarios, potentially the blockade scenario, things that would be short of an invasion. And those are clearly some issues that still need to be worked out between the U.S. and Taiwan. I think our Congress will also take up some of those issues in the NDA process, as well as perhaps some standalone efforts directed at Taiwan. We certainly followed the events of last year's NDAA and the provision for foreign military financing, although those ultimately were in the form of grants and not in the form, were in the form of loans and not in the form of grants. So we've yet to see Taiwan move forward with those requests, as their interest in the actual loans are probably somewhat limited. We have a lot of work going on in terms of Indo-Pacific posture. You know, as we think about Taiwan and our opportunities to support Taiwan in the event of a contingency, there is the tyranny of time and distance that we need to deal with, and the fact that we're postured in a legacy posture, very concentrated in Korea, very concentrated in Japan, and therefore we need to be able to fight and sustain the fight in a contested environment, in a distributed, dispersed fashion, which means we need points of access. So we have developments such as the new agreement with the Philippines, the 4 additional ECTA sites, the Enhanced Defense Cooperation Agreement sites, that will give U.S. forces the opportunity to forward deploy materials, perhaps even munitions, and other logistics and maintenance support in the Philippines, which, given the geographic proximity, is a very important development for the United States. We have major multilateral initiatives, the AUKUS agreement, which is a very forward-leaning agreement to get your closest European ally, the UK, more invested in the Indo-Pacific region. But I think primarily the outcome related to the submarine deal is hugely significant when you consider why the Australians would have an interest in nuclear-powered submarines. Certainly, coastal defense, diesel, electric, conventional powered submarines would be sufficient for that. But they're thinking more broadly. They're thinking about affecting security throughout the Indo-Pacific region, and they want that endurance and that ability to operate further from the homeland that a nuclear propulsion submarine would provide. So we've now learned about the optimal pathway forward and the plans to provide training opportunities through embeds and on US and UK platforms, having persistent rotations through Western Australia. HMS Sterling in the Perth area will be utilized by both the US and the UK, followed by the sale of 3 Virginia-class submarines and ultimately leading to a new build program with Australia. So very important development. We, of course, have the Quad, which has now been meeting at the presidential prime minister level. These are all very positive developments at a time when U.S.-China relations continued to be very stressed. You know, when President Biden met with Xi Jinping in Bali last November, they were supposed to find the floor and build the guardrails to prevent a true spiraling of the relationship. And while they spoke about that very objective of finding the floor, that was prior to the spy balloon incident. That was prior to Xi Jinping's visit to Moscow to embrace Putin. So there's still a lot of tension and a lot of difficulties in the U.S.-China relationship. In particular, while Xi Jinping was in Moscow, doubling down on a strategic partnership with Putin, we saw contrasts with Prime Minister Kishida visiting Kiev and helping our friends in Kiev deal with this ongoing tragic invasion and attacks from Russia. So a real contrast in leadership in the Indo-Pacific region, but certainly one that shows Xi Jinping is prioritizing his strategic partnership with Putin over virtually all other considerations at this time. So a lot of recent developments that are important. We of course have a new Congress seated and new work underway, and we look forward to hearing from Senator Sullivan on the SASC. But we should also note the work of the new China Select Committee, chaired by Congressman Mike Gallagher, who we've been privileged to host here in the past at Project 2049. The Select Committee has now conducted 2 hearings. They are staffing up their team. Although not a committee of jurisdiction, the anticipation is they will drive a lot of this debate, and a lot of it may ultimately focus on Taiwan. Chairman Gallagher took a delegation to Taiwan earlier this year. Ro Khanna on the Democrat side brought a parallel delegation to Taiwan to have discussions with President Tsai and other leaders in Taiwan to better understand their requirements as we go forward. So as the Select Committee does its work, certainly we would expect Taiwan to play a prominent role in their thinking and how they're addressing their research priorities and their hearings. And we expect that will then later inform the work of committees like the Armed Services Committee and inform the process of the NDAA. So a great deal to talk about today, and I look forward to Senator Sullivan joining in a moment. I might at this point pause and turn over to our moderator, Ms. Hong, and see if there are some framing comments from other participants of our team.
Thank you, Randy. Thank you for that great opening. My name is Jennifer Hong. I'm the Senior Director at Project 2049. We are so glad you're here with us. And as we are waiting for Senator Sullivan to join, I wanted to turn it over to Mark Stokes, our Executive Director, for any opening thoughts or comments based on that scene setter. Mark? I think we are experiencing slight technical difficulties here. We will give Mark a few more minutes If
I think we're in business now there. Jen, appreciate it.
Mark, I think we still,
Just in terms of a few remarks for context, I'd like to pose three questions. The first is, why does Taiwan matter? Second question, deter what? And the third is how to deter China's political objectives vis-a-vis Taiwan. With regard to the first one, why Taiwan matters, I would offer three reasons. Number one, objective reality. Taiwan, under its current ROC constitution, exists as an independent sovereign state. And that is objective reality. How we deal with it and how we acknowledge and how we legitimize that is a related but separate question. So it exists, therefore it is just as important as any other country in which we engage with diplomatic relations. Number two, Taiwan matters because of its unique economic characteristics. It has a niche capability in the area of microelectronics. That is primarily due to Taiwan's unique attributes as a very population dense, basically a very dense population, and that leads to certain sort of innovations within society. So it's very oriented toward innovation. Third reason, democracy. Taiwan, of course, is an open society. However, from the United States perspective, we extend from an oversimplistic perspective on one China. We have normal diplomatic relations with the People's Republic of China, which is an authoritarian regime, and withhold equal diplomatic relations from Taiwan that has emerged into a vibrant democracy. So as a result, we extend legitimacy to an authoritarian dictatorship and withhold legitimacy from a country that is sort of part of the community of democracies. So I will hold it there and turn things back over to you, and can engage later as required. Thank you.
thank you, Mark. I'll turn it over to Eric Lee, our Associate Program Director, for opening remarks. Eric?
Thank you, Jen. I appreciate the invitation to speak on this. You know, Senator Sullivan has been very vocal on a lot of issues regarding Taiwan, especially deterrence in three regards. So I'm eager to hear his comments there. You know, one thing that has dominated the discussion in DC on Taiwan's defense has been arms sales. And given defense industrial base challenges, the war in Ukraine, there have been significant delays to deliveries of FMS cases in Taiwan. So one of the key aspects of the defense relationship is focusing on what can we do beyond just arms sales. And
Hey, Eric?
this is something.
Eric, let me interrupt you. We've been joined by Senator Sullivan. Sorry, we'd like to return to your comments, but Senator Sullivan's time is very valuable at all times, but particularly this morning, given the hearing with Secretary Austin and Chairman Milley. So we'd like to jump right into that. Senator Sullivan, welcome and thank you for joining us. I need help.
I got it.
I need help.
Can you guys hear me? Yep, you can hear me.
Now we can, Senator. Sorry.
All right, sorry. Let me start over here. So, so I apologize both for jumping in late here, and then probably gonna have to scoot out a little bit soon. As Randy mentioned, I'm in the middle of an armed services hearing with Chairman Milley, Secretary Austin, and I'm going to ask him a lot about the issues that I'll actually preview with you guys what I'm going to ask him here in about 20 minutes. The hearing's happening right now, but and I want to thank John Gastright, who I know has done a ton of work with Project 2049. And all of you who are working this issue. It's so important. And actually, today's going to be an interesting day for me. I've been given this speech. Hopefully some of you see it. I was going to, maybe we can send the slides on this and this pamphlet. I've been given this speech all over the town and in the Senate on the issue of why Taiwan matters. And the whole point of the speech is to lay out both the history of our country's involvement with Taiwan, and also importantly, the assessment of what would happen if there was a successful military invasion or conquering of Taiwan by the PLA and CCP, and what that would mean for the interest of the United States and our allies. Believe it or not, I don't think this has been done enough. I'm going to raise it in the hearing today. Again, as a bit of a preview, I'm going to actually brief my Republican conference on this very topic today at our policy lunch. And with all of you, you get it and you understand it. But my point is going to be, and again, with General Austin, Secretary Milley, and like I said, in a couple minutes, you know, the American people need to understand this. This is where we need leaders, elected leaders, and others to just walk through, hey, what does this mean? What is our history? What does it mean if China takes over Taiwan for America's interest, not just Taiwan's interest, of course, which would be a disaster? And then what can we do to deter that? A war in the Taiwan Strait is not going to be launched by the United States. It's not going to be launched by Taiwan. It's going to be launched by one entity, Xi Jinping, the dictator of the CCP in China, and the CCP. So what I do in my remarks and what I'm going to mention to Millie and Austin today, I like to talk about the 3 levels of deterrence that could dissuade Xi Jinping from undertaking a military invasion of Taiwan. What are they? Well, first, the first level has been, you know, what's referred to, I'm not sure I like the term, but the porcupine strategy, getting Taiwan enough capabilities, enough military assets and training to defend itself, or at least hold off for several weeks. What we're seeing in Ukraine is the perfect example. And I always say, and it is important, and hopefully you guys will discuss it today, the will of the Taiwanese to fight like the Ukrainians is a really important issue. The United States of America can't want Taiwan freedom more than the Taiwanese. That's number one. That's the first level of deterrence. The second level of deterrence has always been the level that's kept Taiwan free, to be quite frank, and that's throughout our history. When there's been a threatened invasion of Taiwan, the United States military, particularly its Navy and Marine Corps, has shown up very strongly and said, nope, not today. That was in the 1950s, 2 different Taiwan Strait crises that I preview in this speech. And then in 95 and 96, some of you might remember that what's now referred to as the 3rd Taiwan Strait crisis. I remember it very well because I was actually on one of the Marine Corps amphibious ready group ships in the Taiwan Strait. My ship was actually in the Taiwan Strait during that crisis, kind of saying, don't do it, right? Don't do it. Clinton, to his credit, sent 2 carrier strike groups and a Marine Expeditionary Unit amphibious ready group. I was part of that a long time ago. But so that was a commitment of American resolve and determination. Do we still have that today? I think it's a really important question. And finally, what I did in this speech is I tasked several different intel agencies, several, I won't name all of them, on why, on what the world would look like in the aftermath of a successful invasion. Either we don't get there in time, or we don't defend Taiwan, or we get there in time and the PLA defeats the US Navy in the Taiwan Strait. That world, as all of you know, is a really, really dangerous world that would have global ramifications, not just ramifications in the Taiwan Strait, not just ramifications in East Asia. It would have global ramifications. And in my speech, I like to recall another moment in American history, a proud moment in American history, when we recognize as a country, despite being tired from World War II, that another enclave of freedom that was threatened by a giant totalitarian regime on the march meant something, not just for that region or that city, but for the world. And that was, of course, Berlin, West Berlin. And the United States spent decades protecting this tiny little enclave of 300,000 people who weren't Americans. We did it because we understood what it meant for the world. And I like to say that Taiwan is the 21st century Berlin, West Berlin. And we need to think about it that way. So I've been giving this speech all over town. I'm going to encourage all my Republican colleagues. Hell, in 20 minutes, 10 minutes, I'm going to encourage Millie and Austin and the President of the United States to give speeches like this. And here's the final issue. We need to understand this because we have to have will. Say what you want about the Chinese Communist Party, and I don't have a lot of compliments for them. But with regard to Taiwan, they have will. And we need to have and understand our own history, including the Taiwan Relations Act, which was a remarkable piece of legislation that Joe Biden voted for, by the way, that set the standard for how we're going to deal with Taiwan when a president of the United States was essentially going to let a long-standing ally go free. Hey, good luck, Taiwan. Jimmy Carter was doing that when they recognized Beijing. And the United States Senate, in particular, came in and said, we're not going to do that. Sorry, Mr. President. The U.S. Senate has all kinds of power in terms of foreign policy and national security under our constitutional system of government. We are going to lay out the way in which we're going to deal with Taiwan. And that Taiwan Relations Act, a remarkable piece of legislation, to this day is what controls our relationship. So I'll just mention the final point. My first time going to Taiwan, not as a Marine in the Taiwan Strait, but as a U.S. Senator, was Senator McCain on a CODEL he led in 2016. The new president had just been elected, or maybe it was 2017. The AIT representative, the American, on Taiwan, got on the bus with these 5 senators, and I'll never forget what he said. He said, welcome to Taiwan, one of the most vibrant democracies in the world, one of the most innovative economies in the world, the 8th or 9th largest economy on the planet. And the only reason this place of 24 million people exists is because of the determination and willingness to sacrifice of the United States military and the American people. It was very powerful for me. And I don't know if enough Americans understand that. They should. But this is something that I think is important. I'm going to keep working it. And again, I'm sorry, John and Randy and others, that I got to get back to this hearing soon. But that's what we're working on. We'll send you this pamphlet. It's got all my slides and everything that we lay out. And of course, I don't have to tell you, but in terms of economics, geostrategic value, the boost to Xi Jinping's authoritarian model globally, all of these things would be interests that would be harmed for the United States and advanced for the Chinese Communist Party with a successful invasion of Taiwan. And I think it's strongly in the United States' interest to make sure that does not happen. In the final area of deterrence, I talk about the first level, the porcupine strategy, the second level, American military commitment and our allies like Japan or Australia or the Brits to come to the aid of Taiwan if ordered to do so. The third level, which I think is the most important, believe it or not, and is rarely talked about, is the economic level. I have a legislation called the Stand with Taiwan Act. It would be essentially lays out massive economic, financial, and we're going to update this with energy sanctions against the CCP if they invade Taiwan. I've been going around the world to our allies, the EU, the Germans, the Brits, the Dutch, the Koreans, the Japanese, with my legislation saying, hey, you guys should do something here too. Think about it. If we could get 70% of the world's GDP to essentially say, hey, here's what you're going to get, Xi Jinping, if you invade Taiwan from an economic, financial, and energy sanction package, that could likely have the biggest deterrence impact on an invasion than anything. Heck, even 2 carrier strike groups. So I'm continuing to work that. The White House is supportive, I think. I'm going to mention it in this hearing today. I think the State Department's supportive. If you don't want war in the Taiwan Strait, you should co-sponsor and help me pass my Stand with Taiwan Act. So anyways, that's my brief update, and I'd be glad to take a few questions before I get back. I want to thank you guys again. I really apologize. I was looking forward to being on this panel for the full hour, and the scheduling just got a little bit mixed up on our end without the recognition that this is one of the most important armed services hearings of the year, and I need to be in it and asking questions on it. So you just got a preview of what I'm going to ask Austin and Millie here in about 10 minutes.
Great. Well, thank you, Senator Sullivan. And as much as we'd love to have you for the whole hour, we actually want you in that hearing too. These are important issues for you to raise with the leadership in the military and DoD. So if we could take just a couple more minutes
Sure.
and ask some questions. I know one of the things that you've been very active on over the years related to the China threat and a possible Taiwan contingency is our posture and our work with allies and partners. And you certainly taught me a lot about geography, going through Alaska and seeing the proximity, or at least experiencing it on those short flights to Asia from Alaska. How do you think we're doing on posture right now? And could you foresee the Senate being involved in helping Indo-PACOM work through that in the coming Congress?
Yeah, I think, Randy, and thanks again for your great service at the Pentagon. I think it's good news and bad news. As the Congress, the Senate in particular, I was one of the co-sponsors, really pushed this Pacific Deterrence Initiative on the Pentagon, right? We pressed them to focus more in the region with more resources. That I think is continuing to go well, but we press it. Secretary Austin, literally in his opening statement about 20 minutes ago, highlighted the president's budget as bolstering the Pacific Deterrence Initiative. So that's positive. He will get full support from the Congress and the Senate on that. The broader problem, though, is the administration, despite all these challenges, literally the secretary and the chairman 5 minutes ago, just as I was walking out, said the most dangerous period in international relations since World War II. Okay? All right. So what do? They keep putting forward budgets that are inflation-adjusted cuts. I mean, that's just not consistent with where we are in terms of the challenges facing the United States today. And I'm going to pound them on that in a couple minutes, but they come out with these statements about how it's the most dangerous time. They said it last year. And then what the Biden administration has done every year for 3 years is put forward a defense budget that prioritizes, with regard to federal agencies, DoD last. I mean, it's always last. DoD and Homeland Security always get cuts. The EPA gets 20% double-digit increases, right? It's nuts. And so, to your point on posture, what does that budget mean? It means a shrinking Navy. It means a shrinking Army. It means a shrinking Marine Corps. That's what they are proposing, to dramatically shrink the Navy and the Army. Well, guess who that emboldens? Guess who that really pleases? Not the U.S. military members, not our allies, but Xi Jinping and Putin. And that's a real problem. Now, so what happens? The last 2 years, as you've seen it, a bipartisan group of senators, especially me and others on the Armed Services Committee, say this budget is inadequate, and we plus it up dramatically. The administration kind of winks and nods, saying they wouldn't mind that. But you know what? I've been told by an administration official that, well, they put forward a weak budget to please the progressive left of the Democratic Party, who kind of hates the military anyways, and they know us senators will plus it up. And that's happened. And that's going to happen again this year. We know it. But you know what, Randy, you know this. You guys all know this. That is the opposite of leadership. That is the definition of leading from behind. And it's a problem because it sends the wrong signals to our allies and our adversaries in the region in terms of force posture, particularly given what the Chinese are doing as this administration submits budgets that are cuts to our defense base.
Well, thank you for that. You mentioned Xi Jinping and Putin. Of course, Xi Jinping was in Moscow last week, fully embracing the strategic partnership. there is some discussion about the drag of the war in Ukraine, what that means for our resources, and the follow-on effect, what that means for our readiness in the Indo-Pacific and dealing with China. Some are saying we have to focus more on the China challenge, and that might mean some trade-offs related to support for Ukraine. There are others that say no, to deter Xi Jinping, you need to defeat Putin. How sustainable do you think this is in terms of supporting Ukraine and meeting commitments in the Indo-Pacific, like Taiwan?
Well, it's a really important issue, and we're having a robust debate within our Republican conference on this very topic. And I think the Ukrainian war has certainly highlighted deficiencies in our industrial base. And with regard to weapon systems, it's highlighted the importance of getting asymmetrical weapon systems to the Taiwanese. It's highlighted the importance of helping them train, and this issue of really highlighting the importance of this will to fight. Americans are much more likely to be strongly supportive of countries that are in there risking their own lives, being courageous the way in which the Ukrainians are. So in that regard, it's been a bit alarming, but I think there's a silver lining in that the industrial base issues for the United States are very much highlighted, and it's a bipartisan push to try to address these. Similarly, getting Taiwan the weapons it needs now, today. Roger Wicker just asked that very question about 10 minutes ago in our hearing. That's important. Where I think it's becoming more of a challenge is that you're starting to see, and it's still a small group within the Republican Party that's saying, Republican elected leaders, that, well, we need to cut our losses, stop providing aid to Ukraine because we need to focus on Taiwan. Okay, there's some basic logic to that. I just happen to disagree with it fundamentally. If our allies in Europe see us saying, you know what, we got involved, we didn't have the stomach to see this through, we're going to turn to the Asia Pacific. And if we're not, in my view, look, the Ukrainians have been courageous, there's no doubt. And I do think the framework that's been set by the Biden administration, which is to help them, but not commit U.S. forces, is the correct framework. But if it weren't for the United States aid and support, I think it's safe to say that Putin would have very likely defeated most of that country. And so what the people who are saying, hey, let's shift our focus the other way, what they never answer is, well, if we stop providing them assistance, what do you think's going to happen? If the answer is, well, it's likely a Putin-Russian victory in Ukraine, I don't understand or see how that helps the Taiwan issue at all. As a matter of fact, I think it undermines it dramatically. And don't take it from me or any other American. Prime Minister Kishida has talked about how Ukraine and what happens there and what's happening in the Taiwan Strait are inseparable. Now, that's someone who knows the region very well, the Prime Minister of Japan. So I think this idea that we have this choice, in my view, it's a false choice. And I think if we say, you know what, good luck, Ukraine, we're going to focus on Taiwan, I actually think that's going to undermine our ability to deter the Chinese Communist Party and Xi Jinping in Taiwan. And so we're debating that. Some others, smart guys, maybe on this panel, disagree with me, but I don't want to risk it. And with regard to Ukraine, there is weakening support. One of the areas that I've been really focused on is to turn it back on our European allies and say, hey, guys, and I know, Randy, you cared about this issue. You need to step up. You need to step up. Your 2% GDP target, which you were supposed to do 10 years ago, the report came out 6 of 30. That is really pathetic. 6 of 30 NATO countries. And, if they keep doing that, even great states like mine, most Alaskans are very knowledgeable about foreign policy, national security, because we have so many veterans. more veterans per capita in any state in the country. Most understand the stakes in Taiwan, but when they press me on it, hey, Dan, how come the Europeans aren't doing more? And by the way, I get asked that a lot back home. You know, there's not a great answer to that. The Europeans need to do a heck of a lot more, at least get to their 2% GDP commitments on defense that they made 10 years ago to sustain the effort. So it's going to be important, but these are, in my view, very linked. I got time for one question, and I'll probably got to get back to this hearing.
Well, we were going to encourage you to go back to the hearing.
Okay, I'm going to go back.
A short panel, and it's important that you get there. So thank you so much for your.
Thanks, you guys. Keep up all the great work that you're doing. It really, really matters. And we'll send you our pamphlet, get it out to all the members of the Project 2049, and help you spread the word on why Taiwan matters and what we should be doing about it.
We will indeed. Thank you.
Okay, thanks everybody.
Best of luck.
Thanks.
We're going to turn it back over to our host, Jen Hong.
Thank you, Randy. Thank you, Senator Sullivan, for joining us today on your busy, packed day. And we really appreciate your insights and comments. And we are so glad that you were able to join us for the time that you were able to. Once again, my name is Jennifer Hong. I'm Senior Director at Project 2049, and we're now transitioning into the second part of our webinar. Now I'm going to invite our panelists to come and provide a brief remarks to what we've just heard. So I wanted to start with Yuki Tatsumi, Senior Fellow and Co-Director of the East Asia Program and Director of the Japan Program at the Stimson Center. Yuki, thank you for being with us today. I'll start with you on some of your thoughts of what you heard. Over to you.
Thank you, Jen, and good morning, everyone. Greetings from Tokyo. Delighted to join, and I'm just still trying to digest the powerful remarks that Senator Sullivan just shared with us today about the status of Taiwan and the sense of urgency that he shared with us on this. And in fact, for the last couple of days that I've been in Tokyo, most of the time I've been spending time speaking with my colleagues back in the Ministry of Defense and other places exactly on this topic. And I cannot stress enough the sense of urgency that are prevalent, that are coming out of my conversation with my friends back here. And as Senator Sullivan mentioned, Japan has decided to and committed itself to double its defense spending to a 2% of its GDP within 5 years. And they are accelerating their force modernization and optimization of their forces, upgrading the whatever the necessary equipment, taking a very holistic look at the way that they can fight more efficiently and effectively. And they do have a long list of things that they would like to accomplish, but they have a strong determination to get there. And then I do think that witnessing what went down in Ukraine really shore up the public support for the Japanese government's effort in this direction. And Prime Minister Kishida, as Senator Sullivan mentioned, has continues to talk about how what happened in Ukraine could happen in Indo-Pacific region as well. And it is really up to the countries in the region to be able to defend itself and have a capability to do so and do whatever it takes to get there. And that's exactly what Tokyo is doing. And another issue is that this Russian invasion of Ukraine really opened the door for a lot of the conversation that has been perceived as more of a political taboo in Japan. Talking more openly about this connectivity between the crisis across the Taiwan Strait to Japan's own national security is definitely one of them. That sense which had been privileged shared among the experts and within the government officials. But since the Russian invasion of Ukraine, and also, quite frankly, for the last year or two, as China gets more assertive in the Indo-Pacific region, it really opened up the door to this whole realm of conversation of what is really going on, what Japan needs to do, and what Japan needs to make sure that it happens. So I think I very much resonate with the sense of urgency that Senator Sullivan just felt with us this morning about time is really not on our side exactly, and it is really up to us collectively to make sure to make sure that Taiwan remains a peaceful and a vibrant democracy as it is today.
Thank you, Yuki. Thank you for that insight from Japan, and thank you for joining us so late in the evening in Tokyo. With that, I wanted to turn it over to Eric. I know, Eric, you were cut off when Senator Sullivan joined us. We'll love to hear your thoughts in addition to any insights that you've had from Senator Sullivan's remarks.
Yeah, thanks for that, Jen. Indeed, Senator Sullivan's remarks were very powerful and very key. The first point about why Taiwan matters is something that has been discussed in kind of niche circles, in academic circles. But as the Taiwan Strait heats up and tensions rise, it's more and more important for regular Americans to understand why Taiwan matters. There's historical and economic and geopolitical considerations that I think not only Senator Sullivan, but other US officials, and including the president, as the senator said himself, need to make that clear, because that is important for morale and to really get the entire movement to really focus on this challenge that is really key to US national security and global peace and security. Another aspect that the senator mentioned is this three-layered deterrence, and it's very important. Taiwan's defense is that first layer that the senator mentioned, and Taiwan is indeed making significant reforms and changes to its defense. And this includes an increased defense budget, extending conscription service from 4 months to 12 months, and planned reforms for the Army and training to get a more professionalized force. In response to PLA coercion following the Pelosi visit to Taiwan a few months ago, Taiwan has now initiated almost a private-public partnership framework for developing multiple types of UAS that would support Taiwan's efforts against coercion. Outside of the government, there have been multiple civil defense organizations that have sprung up and have been started to equip and help civilians to be prepared in every way possible, not necessarily preparing for war, but being ready for all contingencies across the peace-war continuum. And that piece about sanctions and economic leverage that the senator mentioned is indeed very key. And another reason why this fight in Ukraine is so important, that the US continues supporting it in the way that it is that allies and partners will be needed to uphold and strengthen efforts to dissuade and deter China from an economic standpoint. And those are some initial thoughts, and I'd like to turn it back to you, Jen. Thank you.
Thank you. I have to say we have many questions that are coming in right now for the live Q&A. So if that's okay, I will turn it over to all our panelists to entertain some of our questions. I'm going to ask the first question, came from Ethan Franz. How should the United States and Japan and its allies and their allies help ensure Taiwan does not lose any more of their official diplomatic allies, given that so many, especially recently as Honduras, have changed and switched their recognition? Yuki, I want to turn it over to you, and maybe we can start with you and then go through other panelists.
Thanks, Jan. So the first question is a really challenging one too, because it is really, at the end of the day, it is really up to the sovereign country's decision in terms of a diplomatic recognition. It is indeed very unfortunate that this has been happening more and more often. I think it kind of goes to the point that we're making in terms of how China has been using everything in its toolbox to create environment where less and less number of the countries feel comfortable about maintaining their diplomatic recognition vis-a-vis Taiwan. And then I think the only thing that I could think of my top of my head in terms of what U.S. and Japan can do is really to because a lot of the times I think many countries, so many countries that are doing this could be dependent on China for something, whether that may be their financial aid or some other other measures for their country. So I think only thing that I can think of that the U.S. and Japan can do is to make sure that offer these countries a very credible and effective alternative that they could go for, so that they really don't have they don't really feel the need to make these kind of choices.
Jen, if it's okay, let me jump in briefly. It is going to be very hard that they're down to 13 remaining diplomatic allies, and I would expect that number will further decrease, unfortunately. But I think what's important is that we prioritize some of the remaining countries, and then see if there's a country or two we might bring over to the Taiwan camp. And what I mean by that is, Yuki's exactly right. The U.S. and Japan have to be there to support countries in their needs as they see them, not as we might define them. But there are other issues we can bring to bear. For example, we're in the middle of renegotiating the COFAs right now, the Compacts of Free Association. Two of the three obviously have formal diplomatic relations with Taiwan. That would be Palau and the Republic of the Marshall Islands. The Federated States of Micronesia, the president has been very open that he's been unsatisfied with the relationship with China in many ways, feeling as though he's been pressured and coerced, and wrote in an open letter he was open to considering a relationship with Taiwan. I think if we prioritize the Oceania region, where Taiwan has 4 of its remaining diplomatic allies, there might be a possibility of bringing more into the fold, which would be very important for our own interests and our own security. But it's always an awkward position. You know, it's do as we say, not as we do. We changed relations in 1979 on January 1st of that year. And ever since, we've been strengthening our unofficial relationship with Taiwan. But it's an awkward position to try to encourage others to do not as we did.
Mark?
I can just add to the remarks that Randy and others offered. I would say the most important thing that the United States could do is to make a determination about how we can move toward a more normal, stable, constructive relationship with Taiwan without getting anybody killed in the process. And what that takes is simply a determination at that policy level to be able to say, how do we do it? And I would argue that well, first of all, is come to grips with a basic reality, and that's Taiwan under its current ROC constitution exists as an independent sovereign state. How we deal with that is a matter of policy. So I would say the most important thing we can do is to balance the legitimacy that we extend toward both sides of the Taiwan Strait and make a conscious effort to do that. That is, to me, is the way that we avoid conflict. It may sound provocative, but there are ways to be able to basically to come up with a compromise solution.
Okay. Next question is from General Gregson. How do we eliminate the backlog of weapons Taiwan has paid for and we have not yet delivered? And how do we energize our military industrial capability to reverse the decline in defense production necessary to properly support operations in both the European and Asian theaters? Okay, I will start with you, Rand.
I can start that, Jen, but I think as one would expect, Chip Gregson has asked not only the key question, but one of the most difficult questions. But look, I think it has to do with how we incentivize defense industry here. There's a way of doing business that is, decades in the making, which relates to the fact that most of our defense industry, particularly the large primes, have one major customer that they care most about, which is the United States military and the service components. They do their production plans based on annual budgets for the most part, and have to make calculations based on that. When we have these surge requirements in places like Ukraine and potentially Taiwan, it stresses the system and there just hasn't been the incentives in place to change the way of doing business. I think with Taiwan, that's got to change. And we have to look at whether it's this FMF effort coming to fruition in the form of grants and not loans, whatever it may be. We need to create the incentives for defense industry to meet these requirements in a more timely way. And that could be a combination of incentives. It could be, in some cases, they're going to face competition if they're unable to deliver in the timely manner that was promised in the contracts. It looks as though Taiwan may have more and more opportunities as third-party defense industry starts to get involved. We've been hearing about some European countries, Eastern European countries, that might be planning precedent-setting arms sales to Taiwan. So it's a great question. It's a difficult question, but clearly the way we're doing business and have for decades is not meeting the requirement.
Eric?
Thanks, Jen. And Randy, great comments, and I echo that, in that this is an incredibly difficult question. And just very quickly, just following up on Randy's previous note on the question on allies, the key point, one of the key points is how to bring allies back into Taiwan's camp. And China has been playing checkbook diplomacy to the tune of $2.5 billion with the case of Honduras. But a lot of times in Latin America, China has not been able to, or has not been willing to follow through with its commitments and its promises. So that's an opportunity for U.S. and allies to jump in. But with regard to the defense industrial base, it is a tough question. And I guess a different approach to the Taiwan challenge should be to rely not only on the FMS system. Defense is not only arms sales, and there's a lot more that the United States can do in the political, economic, and military, outside of military hardware domains. And this really boils down to greater cooperation. At a strategic level, there can be greater cooperation in terms of alliance management, or getting close to that. There can be defined roles and missions for the United States and Taiwan to better divert resources and efforts to address key needs in a potentially joint planning scenario. There could be greater cooperation in terms of defense industrial bases to lessen the burden on one side or the other. Mark raised an important point earlier where Taiwan has some key advantages with microelectronics. And indeed, Taiwan plays a critical role in the defense industrial base outside of really high-tech things as well, when it comes down to bolts or LCD screens and glass. So there's a lot of that can be done there. And another part is with energy as well. In this coercive scenario, such as a blockade, Taiwan could face significant energy deficiencies over prolonged periods of time. So I'll stop there and I'll turn it back to you, Jen. Thank you.
Thank you. Mark, what are your thoughts?
I would say the most important thing we can do is to establish a senior level working group on supply chain security and defense industrial cooperation. Model it in a similar way that we do with Japan, with the Systems and Technology Framework, basically, which is a senior level Undersecretary of Defense, or frankly, Undersecretary of State for that matter. It doesn't matter. But having a senior level attention, senior level eyes on how to best satisfy requirements. And part of it, of course, is also supporting Taiwan's effort to develop an indigenous defense industry, not necessarily to compete with the U.S., but to have them tailored, to be able to provide tailored solutions to some of their unique defense requirements. So I would say senior level attention, model it over Japan.
Hey, Yuki, I'm going to give you the final thoughts and comment.
Okay, pressure's on. So I just wanted to highlight the fact that this could offer U.S. industrial base a great opportunity for more international collaboration. Japan is really looking into that direction, and Japan shares a lot of equipment with the United States, and one of the things that could happen is for U.S. and Japan having a conversation about how to better support Taiwan together in this area. And then for that, though, I think a U.S. industry DoD also needs to kind of get out of the mindset of everything got to be done with the FMS. I think Randy's exactly right. There are other venues, and there are DCS. There are other dual-use technology that could enormously help Taiwan's defense capability that they currently don't have, that we may not be aware of. So I think a combination of, Mark what Mark said about establishing the senior level dialogue on this with between U.S. and Taiwan could start highlighting some of those areas that support can be done more efficiently.
Hey, that's an hour with you all. Thank you so much for joining. Thank you. We want to thank Senator Sullivan, Yuki, and the Project 2049 team for insightful comments today. But most importantly, thank you for joining us. Hope you can join us in the future events. This webinar will be available on our YouTube channel and on our website. So please share with those who could not join today. Thank you and have a great day.